All right, Tyler Sullivan of CBS Sports. Let's talk some fantasy football when it comes to trying to help people out because it has been a tough, weird start to the fantasy year because of injuries, because of maybe some underachieving players like Jalen Hurts, whom I have on one of my teams. But I think the focus is on the rookies. And I tried to draft a lot of youth, but the way things worked out, I got Odunze in one league and Brian Thomas in another and everything else. Let's begin with Jayden Daniels and how you would have approached it and how do you approach it now with the possibility of he's one run away from getting an injury.
Yeah, he is remarkable because of the talent. Obviously, a Heisman Trophy winner at LSU, and what we saw on Monday night against Cincinnati was the kind of the peak of what you were hoping when you drafted Jayden Daniels this summer. He's not going to be available on the waivers. He's about 97% rostered on CBS Sports Leagues, but you're talking about somebody who has the ceiling of being a top 5 quarterback, possibly quarterback 1 because of that rushing ability. You saw him complete 90-something% of his passes in that game in week 3, but also he's starting to add that rushing component there as well. He's somebody that I was targeting as my second quarterback in a lot of leagues. I brought in Kyler Murray as my quarterback 1, and then Jayden Daniels as my second quarterback to fill the buys and just to see what the upside would be. Now, if you're in those scenarios, he becomes pretty attractive in terms of a trade chip, as possibly you're looking at teams that maybe had Tua Tagovailoa as their quarterback. He is now injured. Or you're looking at a team that has Justin Herbert and he's now injured. You could possibly improve your roster in those other spots. Or you could say, hey, listen, this guy's awesome. I want to play him as my quarterback, and you move Kyler Murray or somebody that you had as your legit starting quarterback to begin the year. So Jayden Daniels is now quickly becoming a set and forget fantasy quarterback that has the upside of being quarterback 1 on a week in and week out basis.
One other thing that I like to do is play the daily game on a Sunday, just kind of with all the daily action. If you're home and you got a chance to watch the NFL Red Zone and what have you, how much is he a good gamble now as opposed to a guy like Anthony Richardson who still seems to be trying to find his way when it comes to putting together a one-day roster as well?
Yeah, you'll feel more comfortable with Jayden Daniels because we've seen it. We've seen him put these performances. I believe it was over 30 points in fantasy in that week 3 game against Cincinnati. But the thing is, now everybody's going to be onto him, right? You know, everybody's seeing him in a prime time window. We're seeing that ability burst onto the prime time stage. So yes, you'll feel very comfortable about putting Jayden Daniels on a daily fantasy roster, but so will a lot of people. And so you do have to play that game as well, right? Where, yeah, sure, he's going to be rostered in a lot of these contests, and more often than not, that could possibly be the correct approach. But there are times where you do look for a guy like Anthony Richardson, who does have that same type of ceiling, that dual threat ability that may not be rostered as much. So the DFS game is a little bit different because of that. But certainly the logic applies. If you can have a dual threat quarterback in those rosters, your avenue to climb up those leaderboards is just exponential.
Rome Odunze finally had a breakout game, even though I watched the NFL Red Zone on Sunday, all day Sunday. And if you watched that, you felt like Caleb Williams and Odunze were the worst players because they could not put the ball in the end zone together as a red zone tandem, but they had numbers that showed up and were good. How do you approach the rookie wide receivers at this point in the season? I see you mentioned in an email we swapped to Bucky Irving, who I picked up a week ago. Just seems to be trending towards getting more and more playing time. How do you look at all the rookie players here that you're trying to deal with and add to the roster as you go about?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when you have, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, you're drafting those guys to just be your starters. There was no doubt about that you were playing them on a week in, week out basis, starting from week 1, and things are really not going to change outside of injury. Rome Odunze was a little bit of an interesting kind of case test because he was entering an offense where it's a rookie quarterback, but also a crowded wide receiver room. They had DJ Moore. They have Keenan Allen. Now, Keenan Allen has been out the last couple of games, and I think that that's one of the encouraging things that we're seeing from Odunze. He's been able to kind of pick up the slack a little bit. Now, it wasn't the most efficient game, as you mentioned, but for fantasy, we don't necessarily care about efficiency. We care about what the stat line looks like at the end of the day. And for Odunze, he ran routes on 55 of 56 dropbacks for Caleb Williams. He went for 6, 112, and a touchdown, and he had a 21% target share. I think that that's something that's really interesting going forward. Now, of course, Keenan Allen's going to come back. He will be a part of this offense in some capacity. But the Chicago Bears drafted Rome Odunze inside the top 10 for a reason. And as Caleb Williams gets more and more comfortable, if that offensive line is able to hold up, very similar to what we're seeing here in New England, then that offense might be able to start producing fantasy wide receivers more than just DJ Moore. So for Rome Odunze to be, I believe it's about 64% rostered in CBS Sports Leagues, I think that number needs to go up. And the same can be said for Bucky Irving as well. He's gaining on Rachaad White in that Buccaneers backfield. And this is one where you kind of have to pay attention to your league. In CBS Sports Leagues, he's really not available. He's available in, I think, about 30% of leagues, but it's almost flipped if you look at ESPN leagues. So, he's about 30% rostered in ESPN leagues. So again, he's someone that I pay attention to depending on your league format.
How do you go about maybe staying ahead of the game when it comes to waiver claims, right? Because you sit here, we again swapped emails. Justin Fields is a guy that you could look at. Jauan Jennings after the week that he had could be another guy. How do you find those guys maybe? And do you take a shot at looking for people to go get Jennings or go get Fields and maybe leave a Keenan Allen laying there because he's not healthy yet? How do you go about that? And what's the best strategy for how many running backs and how many wide receivers you will possibly have on your bench getting ready forward too?
Yeah, it's really going to depend on your specific roster, right? If you're very comfortable, if you spent the first 2 picks of your fantasy draft this summer on the running back position and those guys are producing for you, if it's a Breece Hall and a Saquon Barkley, if they fell to you in certain respects, well, then you're maybe not going to go as heavily invested in that running back position. Certainly, you'd want Braylon Allen as a handcuff to Breece Hall and things like that. But I don't know if you necessarily would go super crazy with your waiver claims because there's probably other needs that you have on your roster. Like, let's just say for Justin Fields, for example, he's someone that I think should be far more rostered than he is currently on CBS Sports formats, 46% rostered. We were talking about it with Jayden Daniels. When you have those dual threat quarterbacks, it just helps you so much more in fantasy because they can get you points in a totally different way than simply dropping back and throwing the football. Now, what we saw from Justin Fields is somebody that is starting to throw a little bit. He had a really far touchdown throw to Calvin Austin in that game last week against the Chargers, and we've seen his productivity in Chicago where he can rush for over 1,000 yards. So as long as Russell Wilson is not usurping him as the quarterback, and again, they're 3-0, I don't see that happening as long as they continue to win. He's someone that I think could be a very valuable addition on the waiver claims because of the quarterback issues that we've seen across the league. Jauan Jennings, as you noted, he'll be a number 1 claim this week because of just the ridiculous outing that he had this week. Over double-digit catches, nearly 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, it was just absolutely sensational, and he's only rostered in 31% of CBS Sports League. So he is going to be very sought after, and I think that he's someone that has some staying power. The 49ers have been decimated with injuries, but you go back to that week 1 game against the New York Jets where they had everybody healthy, 5 catches for 64 yards, 11.4 points. That's a solid flex outing for somebody, so to me, yes, of course, he's going to be a highly volume target with Deebo Samuel, George Kittle out, but even when they come back, I think he's someone to pay attention to. And you talk about quickly staying ahead of the waiver wire, somebody to pay attention to, Jonathan Brooks. Now, he's rostered in 80% of CBS Sports Leagues, far less in ESPN. So again, check your formats. But he is someone who is start of the year on injury reserve, was the first running back taken at the 2024 NFL Draft. There's a potential that he begins his practice window opening next week. So if you can get him now before that news trickles out, I think that could help you in the long run.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys like that are on the PUP list and have to stay off the field for 4 weeks and then can start practicing. So he'd be a guy. Kendrick Bourne might be an interesting guy too. Let's finish by talking about the Patriots and how you approach them. I mentioned a guy like Kendrick Bourne, who could soon join the wide receiving ranks. Any other people that you might see stepping up here? And one guy to keep an eye on, I think, is Antonio Gibson, because Ramondre Stevenson, as great as he is, has fumbled in 3 straight games. And at some point, Gerard Mayo is going to sit there and say, well, this ain't happening. So maybe he gets some more touches too.
Yeah, I think that's a great call there with Antonio Gibson, because as much as we do look at Ramondre Stevenson as a kind of, RB2 flex option that we're going to kind of play and not really think about, you bring up a good point. He's put the ball on the ground in every game so far this season. And at a certain point, when do Gerard Mayo and the coaching staff and Alex Van Pelt decide to say, hey, we can't afford to give the opposition the football any longer in those opportunities? And maybe that somebody like Antonio Gibson provides a little bit more security in that regard, albeit possibly with a lower ceiling. Now, he is somebody that I think would be very interesting in daily fantasy, because I don't think he's going to be rostered a lot. And if that plays out against a very good San Francisco 49ers defense, there's going to be a lot of opportunities there. And he's someone that can catch the football just as much as he can run the football. So he is someone that I would very much pay attention to. And another one would be Demario Douglas. We talked a lot about him going into the season as a possible PPR threat because of what they could do to simply quickly get the ball in his hands to kind of negate the struggles along the offensive line. Didn't see it through the first couple of weeks, but certainly saw it in week 3 against the New York Jets on Thursday night. It was a forgetful night for the Patriots in general, but you're looking at a guy in Demario Douglas who had 7 catches on 9 targets. Right there, not even talking about the yardage totals, that's a very productive outing in terms of fantasy, in terms of a flex option there as well. So again, someone to keep an eye on, especially as this offensive line continues to go through their struggles. I could very much see Jacoby Brissett making one read and throwing to Demario Douglas to let him make plays with the ball in his hand.
Well, it's going to be fun to watch. And Tyler, thank you. Appreciate you joining us for a few minutes, and want to congratulate Joe Weil. The 8-year-old got married over the weekend. Oh, it just looks like he's 8. So congrats to him and Margaret on their nuptials, and he'll be back in this spot coming up next week. But thanks for taking a few minutes out.